Hello, I'm Tom Stapleton from Camp to Mead. We have another message here today that I'm really excited about sharing. It's called The Beasts of the Mark. Yes, most of the time we hear it the other way around, the mark of the beast, but there's so much talk about the mark of the beast that my question now is going out to people. Well, is the beast in place? And certainly before we can have the mark of the beast, we must have a beast. And so we're going to look at that today because all this talk about the mark of the beast, and there's lots of different ideas about what it is. The main one today, I would say, would be the vaccines as being the mark of the beast. And so we want to look at this, the beasts of the mark, so that we can determine whether we're seeing the mark of the beast today, because certainly we would have to have a beast that implements a mark. So we're going to look at it, we're going to tackle it from that direction. But before we do, we're going to be looking at a whole lot of scripture, so we need the Holy Spirit's guidance before we start. So let's ask for that. Father in heaven, we thank you again for your word that is sure, and we can know what is truth as we search and study it, and as your Spirit leads us. We pray, Father, today that your Spirit would lead us and guide us, and the promise of Yeshua that he would guide us into all truth and show us things to come. If there was ever a time in Earth's history about understanding what's coming, it certainly be now. And Father, we ask that you give us understanding. We pray these things in the name of Yeshua. Amen. So let's look at this. As we think of the beasts of the mark in the book of Revelation, of course, that's where we see the mark of the beast, but the mark of the beast actually is in several different books. And we're going to look a little bit at different places, but primarily we're going to spend our time in Revelation chapter 13, and that's where these beasts are located. But I want to assure you there are glimpses throughout the Bible of these, not only the beasts of the mark, but the mark of the beast as well. So we're going to attack this from a beast perspective here. So in Revelation 13, we see a beast that's like a dragon, and it has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns or diadems, it says, which are crowns. And this is a beast power. And many people are thinking that this is a picture of Satan, which it is, but it's technically the power that he primarily uses to get his persecuting done here on earth. And it's said to be a dragon with 7 heads. And we're going to look at what those heads represent, the horns represent, and the crowns represent, because all of these aspects of this beast are very, very important. And if we don't understand them, then we really don't understand the makeup of the beast and what exactly it is. So that's the first beast we're going to look at. This is found in Revelation chapter 12. There's another beast in Revelation chapter 13 that's got some similarities to the Revelation 12, and there's some really good reasons for that. It's similar in that it has 7 heads, but it has the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. So it's got some different aspects of it. This is what's come to be known as the first beast of Revelation 13. And so that's the first one, that's of Revelation 13. And the second beast, or it says another beast, this one comes up out of the earth. And this is also the beast of Revelation 13, the second beast of Revelation 13. So here we have 3 beasts, and we're going to see how these are very closely connected. The dragon, the first one of Revelation 12, I believe that to be the forerunner, or the instigator, if you will, the primary motivating force for the second beast of Revelation 13, when the kingdoms of the world come together. And it's the Revelation 13, this first beast, that is promoting the mark of the beast. So in our question, we would have to have this beast in full gear before we could have a mark of the beast. And that's the way we're approaching this. So we should be able to see the Revelation 13 beast, the first beast, that's the center one. We should be able to see on the world stage that beast in full operation if the mark of the beast is being implemented. So what I'm looking at, the possibility of we have the cart before the horse. We're looking for the mark of the beast, but we don't even know what the beast is that implements the mark of the beast. So this would come first. So let's try and sort that one out, shall we? And then the second beast is said to, the second beast, that's the buffalo, the bison, has two horns like a lamb, it talks about in Revelation 13. But it speaks like a dragon. Very interesting. It says it speaks like a dragon, but it actually speaks like the dragon. The reason why the dragon is used there is because the dragon is the main persecuting power. So once this power comes up, it says it makes an image to the beast. So it's kind of pointing at that beast. That's the center stage beast here. And it's causing all to receive a mark on the right hand and so on. And it will ultimately kill those. But it's an image to this beast. So in order for the second beast to come up and cause the image to the beast to be worshipped, the first beast has to be on stage. And also the first beast must be enforcing the mark of the beast. So there's a lot of things that have to happen in order for all this to come to pass. So this is what we're going to try and nail down to see exactly who these beasts are. And I believe the Bible's very clear on these points. So we're going to find out who these beasts are. And if we can see that these beasts are working together right now, then we could expect the mark of the beast to follow on the heels of that. There's also one more entity that comes into it. And Revelation 17 says there's a harlot. The Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and she has a golden cup in her hand. This is a power as well that will be instrumental in bringing this mark of the beast to the surface. I believe this harlot power works on the first beast, that's the Revelation chapter 12 beast, and gets that fully in motion. And then this other beast of Revelation 13 embraces this system. And then we see an amalgamation of the kingdoms of the world embracing this system of Babylon. And then they go to work to enforce the mark of the beast on those people where these nations that are represented in these animals are. And in that part of the world, the mark of the beast is enforced first. And then the third beast, the bison, comes up, it says, out of the earth, and he causes all those to worship the first beast. So that's the center stage beast, the amalgamation of the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the seven-headed beast together. So that's when the whole world comes together as a one world order. So first, in the center of Revelation 13, we see a new world order. Then later on with the bison, we see the one world order. And we're going to see this, we're going to take this step by step so that we can see how this comes to be. But that's basically what the presentation is going to be about. So let's go through this and just see how it all happens. The harlot will lead the whole world and take the whole world down, as it were, in its fight against God and his people. Where do we find this in the Gospels? Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. A lot of people don't realize these are the chapters that Yeshua was talking about the time of the end. So we should be able to find the mark of the beast in here. Specifically, the mark of the beast is not mentioned, but the beasts are mentioned. And so we want to look at that just a little bit. And of course, Yeshua points us back to Daniel. So we're going to have to go to Daniel to find this. So we go from Matthew, which is Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, talk about the time of the end and the great persecution that's going to be at the time of the end. This is the mark of the beast period that it's talking about. That's what Yeshua is talking about in these chapters. He also tells us to go to Daniel, so we should be able to see the beasts that are represented in these animals in the book of Daniel as well, in regard to the mark of the beast. And also Daniel, of course, points us to the book of Revelation. We're going to see that very clearly, how the same picture that Daniel was shown to John in the book of Revelation. So let's just open up Matthew. We're going to look at a few verses there, and then we're going to jump right into the book of Revelation. Matthew 24, verse 6. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass first. And I've added that first. In Luke, it tells us these things are going to come to pass first. And in the context, this is what happens first. And then Yeshua goes on, as Matthew records, but the end is not yet. So these things are going to happen first. There's wars. And this is very significant because it's in the stages of the process of getting to the mark of the beast. So wars would be the beginning. It says, for nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. So all of these things are forerunners to the mark of the beast. So we can expect to start to see these things. While there certainly is rumors of wars, famines, just what's happened down in Texas, they've seen when you get a combination of things happening. We have a pestilence going on in this COVID-19, albeit not a major one. I think what Yeshua is talking about here is going to be much, much worse. So with all the lockdowns and everything that's been going on with just something as minor as COVID-19, and I say that kind of reverently because a lot of people have been affected by it, but I don't believe that's what Yeshua was talking about in this chapter. When he's talking about pestilence, he's talking about major pestilences where many, many more people will be dying, and famines on a larger scale as well. So, and it talks about earthquakes. So we're going to see all these things as forerunners to the mark of the beast. It says all these are the beginnings of sorrow. So all these are going to happen before the mark of the beast. So we can expect, as we're moving forward, to start seeing these things if the mark of the beast is around the corner. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. This I believe to be Yeshua's first indication of major persecution following the wars, the pestilences, and so on, the famines. And this is when the mark of the beast is going to be implemented. This is that great tribulation where they will kill you. And this is exactly what it talks about in Revelation chapter 13. So a lot of people don't think of Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21 as being at the period of time of the mark of the beast. But there is no question, because these chapters are portraying events at the time of the end and the great persecution, which will come on the very heels of the mark of the beast. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Then many will be offended and will betray one another and will hate one another. So this persecution is going to bring hatred, and Yeshua talks in other places where brother will be against brother and father against son and so on. This is going to cut families up rather drastically. Some people accepting the mark of the beast and some people won't. Matthew 24 goes on to tell us, 24:11 through 12, then many false prophets will arise up and deceive many. Well, false prophets point to something that's in opposition to God. So this is what we can expect the mark of the beast to be. It's something that opposes something that God has. They're pointing to a false God in some way. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And this word lawlessness is a very interesting word. John tells us, 1 John 3, verse 4, whoever commits sin transgresseth the law also. For sin is transgression of the law. So that phrase there, transgression of the law, is the same word as lawlessness. in the previous verse. So we can see here that lawlessness, transgression of law, which is transgression of God's law. There's a persecution upon the people that are keeping God's law. This is what we're seeing here. So the mark of the beast has to do with a persecuting power on those that are obedient to God's commandments. And we're going to see that come out clearly. So there's going to be world government powers, which are the beasts, and we're going to name them, are the beasts, and they're going to be enforcing a system that's going to go against God's system. Goes on to say in Matthew 24:13 and 14, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. So this is here more evidence that this chapter is talking about the end, talking about the time period just prior to Yeshua's second coming. So this is how we know that this chapter has to do with the mark of the beast and the persecution and so on at the time of the end. And here's more indication. And this gospel, verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all of the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. So you could say it's all nations, all peoples, or all kingdoms, and we're going to talk about these beast powers are ruling over nations. So this is a direct connection here again, is there's going to be a witness. God's people will witness to the whole world, to all the kingdoms of the earth, about the truth, and then the end will come. So God's not going to cut this thing short so that not everyone gets to hear it. Every person in the world will have a chance to decide of which mark they want to accept. Do they want to accept God's mark or Satan's mark? And I have another video that talks specifically about the mark of the beast, and I'll give you the information on that one as we end this video. But here we're looking at the kingdoms of the world that will enforce the mark of the beast. Here's a call for endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith in Yeshua. So here again, at the end, Yeshua talks about those who endure. In Revelation 14, which is talking specifically about the mark of the beast, it says, here's the call for the endurance of the saints. So Yeshua says those that endure to the end will be saved. Revelation tells us the saints are enduring and they're keeping God's commandments. In other words, there's a beast power that is working in opposition to God's commands and their faith in Yeshua. Matthew 24 goes on to say in verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Here's more evidence that as Yeshua was talking about the great persecution at the end, he points us back to Daniel to get more information. And Daniel is where we see these beasts that are going to implement the mark of the beast. So we're going to have to go back to Daniel to see who those beasts are. He goes on to say in verse 21 of Matthew 24, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. So according to Yeshua, at the time of the mark of the beast is implemented, there's never been a time such as this for great persecution, great tribulation. And we see that great tribulation talked about in Revelation we see it in Revelation chapter 7. We see it in 13 and 14 as well. And those that come out of great tribulation, those that are put to death because of the mark of the beast being implemented, will be resurrected in that first resurrection. So that's good news about this. So let's look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke are literal. They don't talk about beasts. It talk about kingdoms and nations. So we're not seeing beasts, but we do see the powers, and they're the kingdoms. We're going to be brought before courts, magistrates, so on. These are heads of electoral powers and so on. And so we see the literal application there, just the way it is. And then Daniel and John, it goes into the symbolic mode, but they're both symbolic and literal. So depending on where you're reading in Daniel and Revelation, we're going to be able to tell whether it's symbolic or whether it's literal. Daniel is literal in chapter 12 of Daniel. That's straight literal. Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 8 are mostly symbolic. They have interpretations that start to tell us about the kingdoms, and that's exactly what we're going to be looking at, is the interpretations, so that we can get an understanding of who these powers are that will implement the mark of the beast. Now, Revelation, just briefly here, Revelation is divided into 7 segments. The first 6 segments here, and if you want to stop the video here, I'm just going to keep going, but if you want to stop and look at this chart, the first 6 segments are little capsules of events that will happen during the time period before Yeshua comes, and you can overlay them. You can take this thing and stack it up sideways, and you can overlay them. They're all talking about the same time period, but there's different sequences of events. So you put them all together, and you have a whole bunch of events into the same time period. The last one is after the millennium and into eternity. So it's just one segment all by itself, and it goes into eternity. That's Revelation 20 through verse 22, or chapter 22. We are going to be looking primarily at one segment in the middle of the book of Revelation. That's chapters 12 through 14. That's where we see these beasts, these 3 beasts we've talked about. That's also where we see the mark of the beast implemented. And that's where we want to look. And that's where we find these 3 beasts. So let's have a look, shall we? The great red dragon, the leopard-like beast, and the beast with lamb-like horns represent the earthly governments that will be leading the war against Jehovah's people. And the Bible's very clear on that. These 3 beasts are government powers that will be working together. The first 2 are very interesting. We're going to have a look at those 2 very carefully. The third beast stands all on its own. That's the one with the lamb-like horns. It also makes an image to the beast and causes all those to worship the first beast. So it's now pointing to the first beast when the mark of the beast is implemented. And that's when it will be a one world order, all working in unison, it says, against God and his kingdom. So there's also another entity that comes into it, as we've said, and that's the harlot, will be reigning over all the kings of the earth. So let's look at Revelation 13, verse 1. Go right to the center stage there. Then I, or he, stood on the sand of the sea. Now, I just want to stop here. In the context of this chapter, it's a carryover from chapter 12. It talks about the dragon, Satan, persecuting the woman, and the woman flees into the wilderness. And it says, actually, on the heels of that, it says, then he stood on the sand of the sea. I want to make a differentiation between this being John or Satan. It makes much more sense. Some Bibles will actually say, and Satan stood on the sand of the sea. The reason why that's very important is this beast that comes up out of the sea has nothing to do with God, but it has everything to do with Satan and his beast power that he's going to bring to life to persecute God's people. And so really it should read, and Satan stood on the sand of the sea. And I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. Now that I is John. And in the words, it's a different word. So you can tell that there's 2 different words here that are being used. So it says, I, John, saw a beast rising up out of the sea. And I want to make the point here, as I've just put in the number 1 here, because it's a beast. But it's an interesting beast. It's a beast made up of different beasts, but it's one beast. This is very important. So this is a system made up of more than just one beast or more than one kingdom. It says it has 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its horns 10 crowns, and on its heads a blasphemous name. And we're not going to get into a blasphemous name other than at this point we want to say a blasphemous name has to do with a religious power. It's blaspheming. In another place we're going to see it's blasphemes against God. So it's saying things against God and his government. This is really important. This is how we nail down that this is actually a religious political power, a combination of religion and the political powers of the day. So we see here, we want to look at what these are. We've got the sand of the sea. We have a beast. We need to know what beasts are. We need to know what the sand is, and so on. All these different symbols. So we're going to have to look at that. So John says he sees this beast rising up out of the sea, and it's full of symbols. And so we're going to go through and look at what these symbols are. We need to know what the sand represents, the sea represents, of course, the beast, what that is, and the 7 heads, 10 horns, 10 crowns on his heads, and the blasphemous name. So we want to take this apart so we can actually make sense of what all of this is. And the best way to give us an understanding on this is to let the Bible interpret itself. So we're going to look at some verses in the Bible that talk about these things, and it tells us what they are. We don't need to guess what these things are. So the sand of the sea, how does the Bible refer to the sand of the sea when it's talking in figurative language? Genesis 32:12. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea. So God is talking about people represented and in numbers as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Joshua 11 verse 4, so they went out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore in multitude, with very many horses and chariots. So here we can see as God, he kind of equates people as sand on the seashore. Here again in the book of Revelation, which is really important to our text because this is talking again, the same author now, talking about the sand of the sea, Revelation 20 verse 8. And Satan will go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. So John, in chapter 13, sees a beast rising out of the sea. We can assume he's talking about a sea of people. That's what we're looking at. We're going to see more evidence as we go of this. Revelation 17 verse 1, same author again, the harlot who sits on many waters. So we see the concept of waters and this harlot sitting on many waters. What does that mean? Is she out in the middle of an ocean somewhere? Well, if we look a little further, we can see what that's talking about. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So we see here that this harlot is sitting on or reigning over peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So if the harlot is actually reigning over all of these things, I just want to kind of focus in on nations. Nations are led by kings or kingdoms or presidents or so on. So if the harlot is sitting on these entities, she's ruling over the kings of the earth. And this is what we're going to see. This harlot will come up and reign over the kings of the earth. So the beasts and horns, let's look at that. Daniel 8 verse 8, therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken. And in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. This is a very important chapter in what we're going to be talking about, and it uses also horns and beasts. So here again, we can look at Daniel and Revelation, and we see some very many similarities. The symbolism is similar. And people say, well, you can't, they're horns and they're beasts here and so on, and it seems to mix them all up. But that's the way God gives prophecy. And we see this really The best place we can see this back in the Old Testament is with Joseph. And Joseph had a dream, and he talked about that to his brothers, got him into a whole bunch of trouble. He saw these sheaves that were all bowed down, and his sheaf was standing up, and they were all worshiping Joseph. That's what the dream, that's how he interpreted it. His brothers didn't like that, of course. And then he had another dream about the sun and the moon and the stars, and he was there, and they were all worshiping him as well. And the two dreams had different symbolism, but they were talking about the same events. And we see this with Daniel and Revelation as well. We see different symbols, but we see very close similarities between them so that we can know it's talking about the same events. Another one in Joseph's life was Pharaoh's dreams, when he saw the 7 lean ears of corn and 7 plump ears of corn, and the 7 lean ones swallowed up the plump ones. And then he saw the lean cows and the fat cows, and the lean cows finally ate the fat cows. Both of those different symbols, but had the same meaning. And this is what we can't miss in the book of Revelation. Chapter 7, chapter 8 in the book of Daniel, and chapter 10 through 12 are actually all talking about the same events. And as we compare the chapters, we can see that the symbols are very closely related. The numbers of them and so on, we're going to see that. And also in the book of Revelation, we see that exactly the same principle in the horns and the beasts and so on. So we can see God represents the same story, but in different ways to different prophets. And even sometimes the same prophet will see it different ways as well. And that's what we see in Daniel and both Revelation. So we move on in Daniel chapter 8, verse 21. It tells us what the goat is, and this is how we can interpret it. We need to stick to how the Bible interprets these symbols, and we're going to be safe. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece, or Javan. And I've got a little video of this Javan and Greece and so on, what that actually means, and I would recommend you have a look at that. This is interesting. This is actually a mistranslation in the Bible. It should be Javan. And Javan is the group of people, he's the grandson of Japheth, Noah's son, came off the ark. And his family, his posterity went west into the Mediterranean and into Europe. And of course, they came across to North America. And so they are the people of Javan. So in the end of time, we can expect that Javan, the people of the West, will have a lot to do with these prophecies that we're looking at. And of course, they do. It says that this large horn between the goat's eyes is the first king. And interesting, at first king, we're thinking of numbers. Naturally, we're thinking that it's the first king as in the first one that comes up, but not necessarily. That word can be used in rank also. So it appears that it's actually in rank in this instance, and as we go, you'll see that comes quite clear. It would be more in line with it's the first king in rank, in the position of power. It's called a notable horn. We see 4 other horns as well. So there are other kingdoms involved, but this is the notable one, or the number 1 king in rank, the most powerful kingdom. Daniel 8:22 gives us a little more information so that we can clearly interpret what this is saying. As for the broken horn, which is the large horn, in verse 8 and 21, and the 4 horns that stood up in its place, this is the notable horn's place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of the goat nation, out of the larger entity, but not with its power. And in the context, and we're going to see this as we go, not in the same power that this power had, this large horn power. So they will be kingdoms that are inferior to this notable one that was broken. But the goat power still keeps moving forward, but now it has 4 that are leading the way on this goat power. And it's quite interesting. You never have horns that are operating all by themselves. They're always attached to an animal. So the animal has to be in full operation in order to have these horns that are in control. And the horns are generally the kingdoms that have the most power in this goat nation, or this amalgamation of powers. So the seven heads, let's look at the seven heads. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits. So we see here this dragon has seven heads. In Revelation chapter 17, it gives us some interpretation of what these heads represent, that this harlot is riding. It says, are seven mountains upon which the woman sits. Now we're going to get into that a little bit later, so just hang on to the seven mountain concepts. And it goes on to say, Revelation 17:10, which is really a tag on to this, there are also seven kings. So I'm going to take some license here, and I'm going to reword this just a little bit. So let's read the whole thing here again. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The seven heads are seven mountains upon which the woman sits. There are also seven kings on which the woman sits. So it's I believe these are tied in. They're definitely talking about the harlot, where the harlot sits, and the harlot sits on also the seven kings. And we're going to see that. This is going to become very clear. So if this isn't really clear, crystal clear right now, we can assume that the harlot is sitting on seven mountains, but it also sits on seven kings, or it heads up or reigns over seven kings. And this is going to become clear as we go. Goes on in Revelation 13:2. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. So this beast is like a leopard. So it's the body of a leopard. It's got seven heads, body of a leopard. His feet are like the feet of a bear, and his mouth the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Now we got to sort out what these are here. So primarily we're looking at this beast with seven heads, but we're focusing in now on the leopard, the bear, the lion, and the dragon that gave him his power and great authority. This beast is the New World Order, and it's going to have great authority in this world. This is the beast that will implement the mark of the beast on more of a world scale, as we're going to see. This beast is said to have seven heads, 10 horns, 10 crowns. And of course, as we've said, it has the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. Now we want to compare this to the Revelation 12 beast, because there's some very close similarities. This Revelation chapter 12 beast is also said to have seven heads and 10 horns, but it has seven crowns. So this is where the difference is. Now, this actually is, let your mind imagine for a second, if you will. This beast is only has seven crowns. The second beast, that's made up of the lion, the bear, leopard, and so on, has 10 crowns. Why does the first beast have seven crowns? The second beast has 10 crowns. This seems to be the significant difference between the two. We don't know at this point that the leopard, the feet of the bear, the mouth of the lion is part of the first beast, the dragon type beast with seven heads. I don't believe it is, and here's the difference. The dragon is the first beast that implements the mark of the beast, the one, the seven-headed, 10-horned beast with seven crowns. This is the first beast that starts to persecute God's people. We see that clearly in Revelation chapter 12. It talks about the woman fleeing into the wilderness and so on, this great persecution against the beast, primarily by this. But when we move into Revelation 13, we see an amalgamation of different beasts, and we also see the seven heads of the first beast are now amalgamated with the second beast, which is the first beast of Revelation 13. So we have the The Revelation 12 beast now with the 7 heads comes and is now a part of this New World system of these other nations, making up the leopard and the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. So we see an amalgamation of these beasts. Now we need to look at this a little bit closer as we go. Now the 7 crowns represent the 7 heads, or the 7 leading kingdoms of the dragon empire. And we can see this. And as we get back to Daniel, we're going to see exactly why we're saying this as well, because we're taking information back to Daniel and comparing this beast with Daniel, as we're going to do as we go. But let's compare it again with this beast of Revelation 13 with the 10 crowns. The first beast of Revelation 12 does not have a leopard, a lion, and a bear. These are the 3 additional kingdoms that come into this power. So we have the dragon power, a leopard power, a bear power, and a lion power. If we have 7 crowns on the 7-headed beast, they're going to bring those crowns to the table, as it were, in the next beast. And the lion, or the leopard, the bear, and the lion will bring the extra 3 crowns. So here we see there's 10 reigning kings in this New World Order. These are the most powerful kingdoms in the world that will come together, and they will allow themselves to be controlled by the harlot. That's the one we talked about in Revelation chapter 17. So this is why we have 3 extra crowns in this next beast in Revelation 13. So we have 10 kingdoms. And this is also very interesting, because when we go over into Revelation 17, it says that there's 10 kingdoms at the end just before Yeshua returns that make up these king powers that are persecuting his people. So we see this consistently as we go through the book of Revelation. So now we're going to have to go back to Daniel chapter 7 to get our identity of these other kingdoms, these other powers. Daniel chapter 7 verse 2 tells us, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. So here we see again, Daniel's having a vision of the great sea. That would be all the world empires are stirring. This is just what Yeshua talked about. Wars, rumors of wars, pestilences, famines, earthquakes. This is the time that we're dealing with, that Yeshua spoke about, pointing us back to Daniel to get more information, of course. And this is what we see. In the time of the end, we're going to see this. 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. So this corresponds with Daniel, or John's vision, that he saw this beast come up out of the sea, made up of the same beast that we see here in the book of Daniel. The first one, it tells us, was like a lion. It had eagle's wings. So this represents a kingdom, or kingdoms. The bear, it tells us, is the second beast that comes up. The third beast is a leopard that comes up that has 4 heads. And the 4th beast, it says, is dreadful and terrible. No name on this beast. It just says it's dreadful and terrible, huge iron teeth and so on, trampling residue with its feet. This is the primary instigator of the persecuting power, a persecuting power for and against God's people. So this power will be the instigator with all these other powers. It tells us in Daniel chapter 7 that this beast will devour the whole earth. In other words, it will move and rule over the whole earth. And this is what we see in the book of Revelation. So Daniel chapter 7, very interesting. It says that there's a beast that has 10 horns. So the 10 horns are paralleling Revelation, what we've already read. It also says that these 10 horns are 10 kings, and we're going to look at that as well. And these 10 horns are 10 kings, and 3 of them are uprooted. So if you have 10 horns, you uproot 3, you only have 7 left. So this corresponds, these are 7 kings that are left over to persecute, and this is the same carryover as we saw in Revelation chapter 12 with this dragon power that has 7 heads and 7 crowns. These are the 7 kingdoms that are the ruling powers, or the ones that are enforcing this mark of the beast in this area of the planet. The persecuting power is led by none other than the harlot. So this is where the harlot sits, on this persecuting power. And once it comes to power, it will reign over all the kings of the earth. And this is what it says actually in Daniel chapter 7 as well. So who are these beasts? It tells us, we don't need to guess. In the interpretation, it tells us that these, Daniel chapter 7, verse 17, it tells us those great beasts, which are 4 kings that arise out of the earth. So this now is the literal of the figurative. So we saw figuratively, they rise up out of the sea, a sea of people. This is the same symbolism as in Revelation. And they're beasts, which are kingdoms. So we don't have to guess who these are. So in the time of the end, these 4 beasts will come together. Very interesting. And this will turn into a new world order. These will disappear, if you will, and we will see another beast come up and rise up out of the sea. And you guessed it, this beast has 7 heads, which are the 7 leading kingdoms of that 4th beast of Daniel. It has the body of a leopard, which is that 3rd beast, and it has the feet of a bear, which is the 2nd beast of Daniel chapter 7, and it has the mouth of a lion. There is something very interesting here that is missing from Daniel chapter 7 to Revelation chapter 13. I don't know if you can remember what it was, the details that you saw, but nowhere in Revelation 13 do we see an eagle. We see an eagle, the eagle's wings are plucked off the lion. So we can expect to see something happen to one of these beasts in Daniel chapter 7, that these eagle wings representing a kingdom in the world that is broken off of these kingdoms here. So we just want to file that for a second, because we're going to come back to that. So here we see a breaking off of eagle's wings in chapter 7, and we see this beast coming together without this eagle aspect of it. So here we see this again, and just a little review, just pulling this together. We're going to see a government power that's made up of 7 heads, 7 main kingdoms that will lead a group of nations. Harlot will lead that. They will start on a persecution of God's people in that area of the world. And then that kingdom will spread to where these other kingdoms are, the lion, the bear, and the leopard. And it will become a new world system led by this harlot power. So we need to figure out who these are, because if we don't have these systems in place, then we cannot have a mark of the beast. So let's go back to Revelation 13:3 and get some more information here. I saw one of its heads as it had been mortally wounded by the sword. In verse 14 of the same chapter, it talks about this wounding, and it says it's wounded by the sword. In the Bible, we see when the sword is used in that terminology, it's talking about war. So we can assume here that this beast power was wounded by the sword. Now, we saw in Daniel chapter 7 where the eagle's wings were plucked off. It doesn't say exactly how that happened. But when we put the 2 chapters together and we put Daniel 8 together, we're going to see that there's a war. As Yeshua said, there would be war in the beginning of the time of the end. And this movement towards a new world order, then to be followed by a one world order, there will be a war that precedes that. And this push for a new world order, this one power, this eagle power, will receive a wound, which is all part and parcel of this movement to a one world order. So this move to a one world order will receive a deadly wound. And I propose that that deadly wound has to do with that eagle. And as we've already looked at it, a notable horn is broken off of beast power, which we're going to see is a New World Order power as well. So we're going to get there as we unfold this, we're going to see. So it says that this deadly wound, this New World Order moving forward, this deadly wound that interrupts the process of the New World Order is healed, and then the world marvels after the beast. So the beast becomes healed, and the world starts to marvel after the beast. So let's go on and see what happens after that. So in Revelation 13, verse 4, tells us, so they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him. It's interesting that the most powerful entity in this seems to be the heads on the dragon, and that just kind of makes sense. They're the ones leading out, and of course, as we have said, that the harlot will be in charge of the whole thing here. So the question is asked, who is like the beast? In other words, if we're talking about kingdoms in the world, are there any other kingdoms like this in the world? Obvious answer is no. Who is able to make war with him? The obvious answer is no one. So this is the most powerful entity in the world. And so the eagle being ripped off, the notable horn being broken, may have challenged this beast, and it would seem that that's why they're broken off of this. So we're going to see how this unfolds here. Revelation 13, verse 5, and he, the beast, was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. This here, a lot of people will think, well, this mouth is the mouth of the lion or one of the mouths on the dragon's heads. But this mouth is in addition to what it's already got. And if we go back and compare this to Daniel chapter 7, 8, verse 8 and 25, we can see that this mouth that's given authority is the same extra kingdom, the same extra king on the fourth beast, that actually uproots three of the kingdoms because they're, I believe, in opposition to this power, this little horn power in Daniel 7. And talks about this same power in verse 25 of Daniel, talks about he changes times and laws, God's times and laws, and enforces his times and laws. And in verse 25, it also tells us that he is in power for a time, times, and a dividing of time, which in this context is a time times and a half, which is 3.5 years. 1 time, 2 times, and a half a time, which 3.5 years would be 42 months. Exactly the same description, same amount of time is given in Revelation 13. So this mouth speaking great things actually is the harlot of Revelation chapter 17. She is the persecuting power, the main power behind the persecution of God's people. And this is what we see both in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, and Revelation chapter 13 and 14. So we go on in Revelation chapter 13, verse 6, and it says, then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. This is kind of interesting, and this really is solidifying the concept that this power, this mouth, is a political and religious power combined, because they are blaspheming everything that has to do with God. And there's definitely some things, we're not going to get into that today, but definitely things that they're blaspheming God and his name, his tabernacle, and those that dwell in heaven. And I just want to, something I found very interesting. Yeshua said in what's commonly be known as the Lord's Prayer, he said, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And it's interesting when we start to look at what God's will is, we're told it's done in heaven and he wants it to be done on earth. So this power is blaspheming those in heaven, which are doing God's will. So this kind of goes along with the concept. He is fighting against God, and he carries on that war here on earth against God's people. Revelation 13:7 goes on to say, it was granted to him to make war with the saints and overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So this mouth is given authority over all the kingdoms of the earth, over every tribe, tongue, and nation. And this harlot is the one that is in control or has the reins in her hands over this beast. We see that very evident in Revelation 17, verse 1. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls of the plagues of God came and talked with me, saying, come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, the mother of harlots, who sits on many waters. So here again, many nations. And it goes on to explain, Revelation 17:2, with whom the kings of the earth, or the beasts of the earth, have committed fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth, these are the nations, these are the sea that it's over, sits over, they were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So the doctrines of her fornication. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So this harlot sits on these multitudes of nations. Revelation 17:3, just want to go back to the starting place here. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet-colored beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Very interesting. It doesn't go on to say here in Revelation 17 that it has 7 crowns, nor does it say it has 10 crowns. So we're left to say, well, which beast is it? Is it the Revelation chapter 12 beast? Or is it the Revelation chapter 13 beast? Well, I propose that it's both. The persecution starts on the first beast that has 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. So 7 reigning kings on that first beast of Revelation chapter 12. But when it becomes amalgamated with the leopard, the bear, and the lion, it now has 10 crowns. So and the harlot now reigns on that beast. So after the amalgamation of the 7 heads with the other beasts, the harlot now reigns over those. So yes, the answer to the question is, it reigns over the first beast in Revelation chapter 12, but after the amalgamation, when the other beasts come into that, making up the New World Order, the harlot doesn't lose her position, but continues, it says, for 42 months. This is how we're trying to make sense out of these kingdoms all working together in the time of the end, the time in which we're living. So Revelation 17:3 tells us, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So we can see here that it is both beasts, the Revelation 12 beast and the Revelation 13 beast, which is the amalgamation of the beasts altogether. Jeremiah gives us a little more information. Babylon was the golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine, therefore the nations are enraged. And this is where we're going. The first beast again, Revelation 17, verse 5. And on her forehead the name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. John could not believe what he saw, that this harlot took control of the whole world and was drunk with the blood of the saints of God's people. This power is a religious and political power that is going to reign and force people to accept its mark. And this power we must see operating in the world, and we must see it reigning over the kings of the earth before we can see a worldwide implementation of the mark of the beast. Now we're going to go back and we're going to nail down who these beast powers are. We're going to start with the 7 heads. So I hope I don't lose you in this 7 heads. So let's have a look, shall we? Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. So we've looked at this, but now we're going back to get some interpretation on this, to see if we can see out there in the world, is this power alive and well? Revelation 17:10 corresponds with Daniel 7:8, verses 8 through 24. There are also 7 kings. So we talked about this. There's this beast power that is going to have 7 main kings that are going to enforce this mark. And we also looked at the idea that there are also 7 kings on which the woman sits. So these 7 kings upon which the harlot is reigning over, this is the Revelation chapter 12 beast, and this is also the 4th beast of Daniel chapter 7. Both of those are identical beasts. They're both talking about the same power. So these 7 kings are being reigned over by this little horn power from Daniel 7, which morphs into the harlot of Revelation chapter 17. These 7 kings. Who is this? First Peter tells us something very interesting. She who is in Babylon, elect together with you, greets you, and so does Mark, my son. This is the only time in the whole of the New Testament that Babylon is mentioned, as far as in the Gospels and the Gospel writers, other than in the book of Revelation. Peter refers to she who is in Babylon. In the Bible, God's church is a lot of times figuratively referred to as a woman. We see this in the book of Revelation. We see this in Isaiah and so on, where God calls his church a woman, a delicate woman. I believe it's in Isaiah. In Revelation, he sees a woman standing in the sun with the moon at her feet and the 12 stars, a garland. This is God's church about to give birth at the end of time to the nation of Israel, actually. It says, she who is in Babylon. So Peter here, I believe, is referring to the church that's in Babylon. Now you say, well, was there a church in Babylon? Did Peter go to Babylon? What is this all about? Well, the best that I can find on this is it's not believed that Peter went to Babylon at all. His reference to Babylon is the sort of a phrase that he referred to as Rome, because Rome was the center of all false religion and worship of kings and so on. And it became known as the code word, if you will, for Rome. So the church that is in Rome, the elect together with you, greets you. So these are God's people. He's bringing greetings from Rome, from the people of Rome, of God's people that were in Rome, in Babylon. So this is something that is a key to understand when we're trying to figure out what the book of Revelation talks about Rome. It has 7 hills. Very interesting. Encyclopedia Britannica talks about Rome, and these are the 7 hills of Rome. So back in ancient Rome, which is the time that Peter lived, Rome was known as the city of 7 hills. There were groups of hills on or about which the ancient city of Rome was built. The original city, Romulus, is where it gets the name Rome, was built upon Palatine. That's the main hill. And then the other hills, the other 6 hills are mentioned here. And as we look at a map of Rome, we can see that the hills are mentioned there. That's the ancient city of Rome. And very close by, very interesting, there is a place called Vatican City, very close to the city that sits on 7 hills. So these are all keys as to what we're looking at. Now, don't forget, this is the ancient city of Rome. This is a reference that Peter makes to Rome being referred to as Babylon, because it was the center of false religion and so on. And guess what today? City of Rome is the center of false religion today. And as we're going to see that, the Catholic Church, or the Universal Church, that's what the word Catholic means, it's called the Universal Church. And that, to me, is one of the reasons it's got one of its names is blasphemy. Any church that calls itself the Universal Church, think about this for a minute. The Universal Church, when I'm thinking Universal Church, I'm thinking something outside of this world, something greater than this world. For any church to be claiming the Universal Church, that would claim to envelop God's kingdom, his universal kingdom. So this truly is, in essence, blasphemy against God. The name of this church itself is blasphemy. So this fully fits the category here. Revelation 17 verse 6 gives us a little more information on this church. It says, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. As we follow the history of the Roman Church, of course, it apostatized, especially at the time of Constantine. Constantine started persecuting God's true followers and morphed then into what we now know as the Catholic Church. The greatest persecuting power that many believe has ever been on the earth. Far greater than Hitler, far greater than any of these other powers. I understand up to possibly even 50 million martyrs by this power through the Dark Ages. And as we follow its history, we can see that it has certainly been drunk with the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. Can we expect this power to rise to prominence again? We are seeing this power rise to prominence again. This little thing about global warming, guess who's heading up the global warming pact? Well, none other than the Pope of Rome. You want to do some homework on it, and he is at the center stage. I find it very interesting when any world leaders cross the world, they always seem to stop at Rome. Why are they stopping at Rome? I wonder why they're stopping at Rome. They might have to run things by this fellow in Rome. This power is going to rise to prominence in the world today. And he will be the one that comes in peaceably, as it talks about in Daniel chapter 11. Comes in peaceably and seizes the kingdom of earth by intrigue. Very interesting that he does this. And we're going to see a couple little things in regard to this. So let's go through the order of events. We have seen all these powers represented as kingdoms, represented as beasts. And we have looked at the final power, the harlot power, that will be instrumental in this great persecution that comes on God's people in the time of the end, the one that implements the mark of the beast. The sequence of events that we are looking at, before the mark of the beast is implemented, we have to have a beast power, we have to have a second beast power. But the very first thing, we've got to get the sequence of events. The very first thing that we're looking for is what Yeshua talked about. You will have wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be pestilences, earthquakes, and famines. These things happen first, then the mark of the beast. The war that we're looking at is a war amongst certain people groups. The goat power, it says, comes from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. This is a power represents the United Nation. This is an amalgamation. This is a push, if you will, towards a new world order. This is the new world order in the making. This is what we have today. What we're seeing in the elections in the United States is a push towards a new world order. I just want to stop here and explain what I'm talking about. Donald Trump was in power for 4 years. There has been a concerted powers, if you will, all over the world to push him out of office. Why? Because he has made it very clear in no uncertain terms that he wants no part of a new world order. And this is why they had to push him out. And I believe they did things that weren't quite right to push him out. We're not going to get into that right now. But this effort is to push us towards a new world order. And certainly Biden today is in sync with this push to a new world order. The war that we're going to face here is going to break the United States. And we're just going to look at a couple verses. It's going to break the United States and cripple it. And the New World Order will go forward. This is why this deadly wound that this amalgamation feels, this deadly wound that it has, is the United States being broken off. And this is how it happens in Daniel 8. It talks about this. This war that it leads the charge on, the notable horn it leads the charge on, is against a ram with 2 horns, and we're told that these 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So what are we looking at? The notable horn being the United States, the great power of the United States. The 4 horns are the United Kingdom, being one power, Russia being another, China being another, and the European Union, which at this point is represented by France in this kingdom. These are these 4 horns that come up. Now, who are these and why am I picking on these kingdoms? The reason why I'm picking on these kingdoms is these are the most powerful kingdoms in the world. If we're expecting kingdoms to come together and enforce a mark that the whole world will accept, these have to be the dominant kingdoms of the world. It should be no surprise to us that these kingdoms that we're talking about are the primary kingdoms of the UN. These are the permanent UN Security Council members. Starting from the top, we have France. We're moving over to China with the star and 4 small stars. United Kingdom, Great Britain, and the United States, of course, and France. These are the major powers in the United States that are going to form a bloc and enforce this new world order, then to be a one world order, and we're going to see how this all comes together. So it goes on to, in Daniel chapter 8, verse 21, the male goat is the UN power. It's all these nations run by these 5 primary nations. The kingdom of Greece, or Javan, which is so fitting because these primary are the kingdoms of the earth, are first and foremost of this. And of course, you have Russia and China following on the heels of this, because once Russia and China start to understand that Islam has an end game, and when they want to bring their end game, which is total world dominance itself, the UN will unite. These 5 permanent members of the UN will unite against this power and defeat this power. And then they will move towards a one world order. And this is why it says, is there any kingdom, we saw this in Revelation chapter 13, who can make war against this power? So when this war is finished and you have this great power now working together, which would be the United States, Great Britain, Russia, China, and the European Union all working together, if there's a power in there that isn't going to go along with this New World Order, they will be broken off. And guess which one it is? It's that notable horn, the large horn between its eyes. Goes on to say here that as this power is becoming great, it says, as for the broken horn, this notable horn, and four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms arise out of that goat nation, but not with its power. What power? The power that the United States wielded. These other nations are inferior to that kingdom that was broken off. So here we see here that this power moves forward. This deadly wound that this goat power receives, this New World Order movement receives, is the United States being broken off, but it moves forward without the United States. Goes on to say that, and in the latter time of their kingdom, this is after the United States is broken off, in the latter time of their kingdom, the 4 other kingdoms remaining, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features who understands sinister schemes. Very interesting. This is this power, this is this Roman power now that comes on board and takes control of this New World Order. Daniel chapter 8, verse 24, his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. So it's not with his own power. He doesn't have a power. Another place it says he doesn't have an army. And the reason is because the Pope of Rome doesn't. It has some Swiss guards, but certainly not enough army to enforce the mark of the beast. It doesn't have to because it's gained rulership over all the kings of the earth. And it's the kings of the earth and their armies that come down and persecute God's people. So let's sum it up, shall we? Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 8, Revelation chapter 12, Revelation chapter 13, verse 8, all talk about this one world order power coming together, headed up by the Pope of Rome. And its beginning phases is a lion. We saw this from Daniel, a bear, a leopard, and a dreadful beast that ends up with 7 heads. And it's ridden by a harlot. And those here again, for just to repeat here, United Kingdom is represented by the lion, Russia the bear, China the leopard, and the mark of the beast, which is first implemented by the European Union. That's this dragon power with the 7 heads and 10 horns. And that's the 4th beast of Daniel chapter 7 that had 10 kings. 3 are uprooted. And so it's left with 7 kingdoms ruling, and another little horn that speaks great things and blasphemy and persecutes God's people. It first starts in Europe. The persecution first starts in Europe. And I say that twice because that's very important. So in order for the mark of the beast to be implemented, it's going to be implemented in Europe first. Then, when these beasts come together to make a new world order, when those European beasts, and then the Russia, China, and the lion come together, they all start persecuting. Then the mark of the beast spreads across Europe into Russia, China, and England, the UK as well. But the United States, no eagle's wings are in here. So the United States is left out of this for a time. And the reason is, I believe, because they did not want any part of this New World Order. That's why they had to be broken off. So now let's just imagine, if you will, if you have the world, the rest of the world across the Atlantic, all working together now, and implemented the mark of the beast, and they're all working in this regard. They have a religious power reigning over them. In order for the United States and Canada and Mexico to be a part of this system, they have to do something. They have to, it tells us in Revelation 13, this other beast rises up out of the earth. You remember the beast, the first beast in Revelation 13, rose up out of the sea, a different area. So in other words, this area that this second beast, it doesn't rise up out of the sea, it rises up out of the earth. A different area, a more sparsely populated area, if you will, comes up out of this area. It's got two horns like a lamb, representing two kingdoms, two possible kingdoms. I would suggest Canada and the United States may play a major role in this power. What it tells us that this second beast makes an image to the beast. So now let's look at it, because all of this has to do with economics. We can see this in the book of Revelation. The United States and Canada now have to play by the rules of the rest of the world. If you look at the world today, the United States basically has been playing by its own rules and really telling the rest of the world what they should do. They're not taking their orders from Europe, they're not taking their orders from China, and they're not taking their orders from Russia. At least they weren't until we had a new government come into play. And we're going to stay away from that for a moment. But I do believe, this is why I do believe that something's going to happen to reinstate a government that's more opposed to the one world order, because this government is broken off. The United States government is broken off, and the New World Order goes forward without. But once the New World Order is formed, the United States now has to bow down to this system in order for economics and economy to move in this, because it is all about economy. We can see this in Revelation 18. The kings of the earth mourn because their goods can't be bought and paid for, and so on. So this is all about economy. The only way that the United States and Canada come back on stream with this power is if they make a system that duplicates the system of the beast. That's why it's called an image to the beast. So the mark of the beast that has already been implemented in Europe and in Russia and in China and in the UK will be brought home to this side of the world. And the United States government at that point will push all the people where it lives. And this is what it says. It causes all those that dwell on the earth. This is the area in which it comes up from. It will cause all of them, it says, to worship the first beast. With that comes an image to the beast. So it implements the same system, the same religious system that is already been implemented in the rest of the world. So here we see at the end of time, these 10 kingdoms are working together, and these 5 kingdoms in the UN, these dominant kingdoms, will come together and force the whole world to implement this mark or this system of the beast. And it will be at that time that we have a one world order, when all the kingdoms, all the major kingdoms are working together for a new world system. And ultimately, the head of that system will be Satan himself, that will be directing traffic and telling these kingdoms what to do. This is the system that God's people don't want any part of. And it tells us here is the endurance of the saints, they which keep the commandments of God and have the same faith of Yeshua. So I hope that was helpful today. I'm going to encourage each and everyone to study this out. Stay faithful and keep studying God's word, and these things will become clearer all the time. So goodbye for now from Camp to Mead and End Times Prophecy. I'm Tom Stapleton, and we look forward to meeting up with you again. Thank you, and may Yah bless.
Hi, thank you for watching. My name is Judy Stapleton. With YouTube beginning to censor more videos, it's more important than ever that you get signed on to our newsletter list so we can continue to keep you updated when we release new videos, perhaps on other platforms. In fact, you might have noticed recently that one of Tom's videos was marked as containing disproven conspiracy theories when he was teaching about the New World Order. So what I would like to do is show you a little bit on our website and ask you to go in and sign up for our newsletter. When you first log into our website, on our homepage, if you've never been here before, it's going to have a large newsletter sign up on the front. But since on my computer I've been here before and closed that out, what you would need to do is scroll down to the bottom. And at the very bottom of nearly every page, we have a subscribe section right here, subscribe to our mailing list. Just put in your email address and click subscribe. But while we're here on the website, I'd like to show you a few other things. When you click on the Present Truth tab, that will take you to some of our more recent videos. Live teachings ordinarily is where we show when Tom is going to be out speaking at different places, and we have live uplinks for those. Unfortunately, with COVID, we don't have any live events planned right now. So there's some prior live events recorded that are there you can watch, but we don't have anything scheduled now. But again, that is something we will have in our newsletters. If we are going to be doing any teachings, perhaps in your area, you would know through the newsletter. Next, when you click on the video library, you'll see that when you hover over that, there are 3 drop-down menus. The first one has videos that are linked to prophecy. The second library has feast days, Israel, temple type video topics. And the third one is kind of our miscellaneous catch-all. We've got the Daily of Daniel, the Millennium, Conditional Prophecy, or just an example of some of the titles you'll find in that library. When you click on articles, you'll also see that we have a large number of printed articles that you can read online. Then our donate page. Our ministry depends on donations from our viewers. We have no other source of income. So I would like to ask if you're at all able to please consider adding our ministry to the list of ministries you support. When you click on the donate page, you'll fill in your name and email, and there are several options you can choose from for a single donation. If none of these numbers fit your needs, and these are in US dollars, let me point that out. Let's say you wanted to give $75 or $300. What you would do then is come down to the one-time donation custom amount and fill in the amount that fits your budget, and then click the Donate Now. When you click the Donate Now, that will take you to PayPal. You do not have to use PayPal funds to do this. You can use your credit card through PayPal. So don't worry if you don't have a PayPal account or funds on your PayPal account. Below that, we also have a recurring donation section. Here you can make a choice to donate $50 every month, $40, $30, $20, or $10. Again, whatever fits your budget. And if you're able to do this on a recurring basis, it will just automatically do this with PayPal, and you don't have to remember each month. And you can cancel that at any time if you choose to. So if you select a recurring donation amount and then just click on subscribe, and again, that will take you through the PayPal process to set that up. We also have our web store. And this is another area where you can help support our ministry. We have books, both ebook format and printed copy, DVDs, MP3 audio files, and the end time prophecy charts that you will hear Tom refer to occasionally. Let's say, for example, you decide you want to order our Why Shall Understand book. You'll just click on that, and it will take you to the description page that tells you about that book. You can read about how it's going to teach the 8 remaining prophetic events that are yet to occur before the second coming. And down at the bottom, you'll see that we have a suggested donation of $15 US for this, but you fill in your amount. Some people are able to give more to help us to be able to send free books to people who are only able to give less. So fill in the amount of donation you're comfortable with, and you can also indicate if you want several books to share with friends or for your Bible study group, and your donation will be per book. When you add that to your cart, Let's say that you decide to do the $15 per book. Add that to the shopping cart. When you view on your shopping cart, you'll see that your 4 books are there at $15 each, and it shows $60. If you want, you can still add an additional donation here, or if you had forgotten to put in a donation amount on the prior page, you can put your donation here and click Add Donation. If you decided that you've got more books than you need, you can lower that, or if you thought of one other person, 2 other people you want to give books to, you can still increase that. And then you'll have to update the cart if you made any changes, and then proceed to checkout. And again, that will take you through PayPal. One last page that I want to show you, here's our contact link. So you can go on our contact page and send us an email. Fill in your name, your email address. We also need to know where you're located, especially if you have a phone number that we decide it's better to call than to reply by email, so we know what time zone you're in. Then in the question or comment section, you'll be able to fill in your question, and you'll have more space in this. The space will expand as you start typing. Then you have the I am not a robot process, the CAPTCHA. When you click that, it may open up to a series of pictures where you have to click on every picture that has perhaps a bicycle or an automobile or traffic light, whatever information they ask for. And when you pass their little test that you're not a robot, this will turn with a check mark in front of it, and then you can hit send. So again, thank you for watching our videos. We appreciate your support. We look forward to meeting again with you soon. Thank you.